Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto. Do the AL and NL MVPs come down to just the Yankees and Dodgers?
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the 2024 MLB Season Preview. Sponsored by FanDuel.
The 2024 MLB season is upon us, and Locked On has the answers to the biggest questions for the season. Over this 5-episode series, you'll hear from every local host we have covering every MLB team in a way only Locked On can provide. I'm your host, Tanitra Batiste, and in this episode, we'll look at the AL and NL candidates for MVP, starting with the American League, who from each division can step into this heated race. We start with the AL East, where the top two candidates, according to FanDuel, both come from the New York Yankees with Aaron Judge and Juan Soto.
And we are going around the division with Braden Owasco from Locked On Blue Jays, Connor Newcomb from Locked On Orioles, Kevin Weiss from Locked On Rays, Gabby Hurlbut from Locked On Red Sox, and Stacey Goutsoulias from Locked On Yankees. So guys, we kind of had a little fun with the fact that Shohei Ohtani is not a part of this discussion, and the fact that he's not a part of the American League anymore maybe is a good thing, because maybe that kind of breaks the MVP race a little bit more open for the American League this upcoming season. So Connor, when you look across not just the American League, but even if you want to drill down into the division or even into the Orioles team, especially because of the conversation about where this Orioles team is going this fall, who would you say would be a likely MVP candidate coming out for this season?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of candidates in the division. Stacey will probably talk about at least two of them. I think, Braden's got at least one. Gabby's got at least one. That's not really the Rays' forte, but they're more the sum of their parts. But yes. I would say for the Orioles, they probably have two. I mean, the big one is Gunnar Henderson coming off of the AL MVP award in 2023. And you have to remember, he was terrible for the first 2 months of the year, and he still won the Rookie of the Year last season. And so if he can put together a full 162, this is a guy who had a 6-WAR season and could win the MVP. And honestly, the other guy is Adley Rutschman. If he stays healthy, he's not going to put up the gaudy numbers, but the importance he has to this team is unbelievable. But I think the Orioles are actually, despite they have a lot of talent, they're a little closer to the Rays in that they are much more about the sum of their parts than kind of the star players at the top of that roster.
Yeah. And Stacey, what about with the Yankees? Obviously, there's that guy we talked about Aaron Judge, but you never know if that guy could be Juan Soto. Are those two viable MVP candidates coming out of Yankees camp, or do you see it as someone else across the AL East or even across the American League as being maybe that top player for the MVP race?
No offense to everyone else. But Aaron Judge, Aaron Judge the year before with the 62 home runs. And then in 2023, he was on pace to do the same thing. Then he broke his toe. Then he came back from breaking his toe and he started hitting home runs again as if he didn't miss any time. So if he hadn't missed those 2 months, he probably could have won the MVP back to back, because it was the kind of season he was having. I almost feel like it might be a detriment in a way to have Soto there too, because they might cancel each other out in MVP votes if the voters are like, oh, well, we can't choose both, so what do we do? But wouldn't that be something if Soto came over here and got the MVP?
Yeah, and that's a great call that you make, Stacey, because there were often times here with the Braves where we felt the same thing. I mean, obviously, at some point, Ronald Acuna Jr. just absolutely ran away with it, but there were other candidates and there were other individuals from this Braves organization who actually did make that top 6 in MVP voting. So yeah, you make a great point. Sometimes it is a cancellation situation, but I guess too, the other side of that point is that's one of those embarrassment of riches situations that most would love to have, right? So Kevin, I'll swing it to you, because obviously, and I think everybody makes a great point just about how the Rays approach things, more of like being the sum rather than the individual parts. But do you see maybe a dark horse from this Rays organization who could come into the MVP conversation this upcoming season?
Yeah, it's really tough without Wander Franco in the role, in the fold that we think. I don't really see a true legit candidate that can fight for that MVP role. Maybe if Yandy Diaz has another career year, but I think that the MVP probably goes through Baltimore, New York this year with some of the names that were mentioned.
And speaking of that, Connor, you look at Braden rather, you look at where this division is, and the competition is there, but sometimes when it's a kind of cream rises to the top situation, it does depend on, hey, do we have that guy or do we have a team of kind of those guys? Do you feel like there's that guy with the Blue Jays who could maybe jump into this conversation?
Yeah, of course. I don't think that's as much of our problem when you look at Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and the season that he's going to have bouncing back. You could even throw Bo Bichette in this conversation as well. But I think at the end of the day, Vlad Guerrero Jr. is going to come back bigger and better than maybe not ever, but bigger and better this year. But overall, as you look out through the entire AL East, Aaron Judge is the clear front runner. So we'll just have to see where it ends up.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I'll tell you, Gabby, that was kind of the idea, again, kind of going back to the Braves, where you come back off that injury, and if Vlad is anywhere close to what he was, might be a long season for the rest of the division and for the rest of those who are in that race. But I'll ask you as well, when you kind of look across the Red Sox, you look across the AL East, but also across the American League as well, what players can you see are MVP candidates, or do you see any dark horses who may kind of surprise us all?
Yeah, I definitely think it was mentioned who some of the bigger favorites are, players that I definitely could see being in the conversation. If I'm looking at the Red Sox roster specifically, there are lots of guys on this team who still have to prove themselves and have to do a lot more to even begin to be in the conversation. But one name that definitely stands out and should be worth noting is Rafael Devers. I mean, he did have 100 RBI, 30 home run season last year, so he had a really good season. This is his team now. He signed that massive contract extension. He is the meat of the Red Sox lineup. If he puts up slightly better numbers than he did last year, then that could be tough for others. And opposing pitchers definitely don't like pitching to him. So this is absolutely his team now. And if anybody on the Red Sox current roster right now deserves to be in the conversation, it absolutely is him. But I'm looking at it again as, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto maybe competing with each other for that award at the end of the day. So it should be fun, quality entertainment for the rest of us if that is the case.
I can name one pitcher who doesn't like pitching to Rafi, Garrett Cole. Not at all. I think he has nightmares about him.
That is very true. Garrett Cole might be his favorite pitcher to go up against, because he just absolutely mashes home runs against that guy. It's crazy, his numbers versus Garrett Cole versus everybody else.
Yeah, if Garrett Cole only faced Rafael Devers, he'd be one of the worst pitchers in baseball history.
Yeah, every year it happens too. It's so funny.
Yeah, it sounds like, Stacey, he kind of lives rent-free in Garrett Cole's head.
Oh yeah.
And that's always fun to watch, especially when we're talking about a Yankee living rent-free in a Red Sox head, or vice versa. That's always a good look. So listen, what I love about this is the AL East has a plethora of options and possibilities in that MVP candidate race. So if you guys want to hear more about how that race plays out, how it tightens up, and how it might go down the stretch, make sure that you check on your favorite Locked On MLB show, your team every single day.
Moving to the AL Central, the first candidate to show up on the FanDuel AL MVP odds list is the Royals' Bobby Witt Jr., but who else from this division will sneak into the conversation?
Brandon Warren with Locked On Twins, Scott Bentley with Locked On Tigers, Jack Johnson with Locked On Royals, and Justin Latta with Locked On Guardians. Now, I know you guys were talking earlier about the fact that this may not be one of the strongest divisions in Major League Baseball, but sometimes even out of that, you'll find the strongest individual players. So with that in mind, Justin, when you look across the American League Central, or even if you look across the American League overall, who do you feel could be that player who might be an MVP worthy candidate?
Well, now that Shohei Ohtani is finally out of the American League, we're all hoping that it's finally Jose Ramirez's year. Jose Ramirez did not have his best year in 2023. We thought that some of the new rules were going to benefit him, and he was good, but he wasn't great. He definitely needs some players to step up to help him. But yeah, with Ohtani out of the American League, hopefully there's more chances for Ohtani. I mean, everybody in the AL Central generally has an MVP candidate. You got Bobby Witt, Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton all have upside for MVP. But yeah, over here in Cleveland, we're hoping with Ohtani gone, it is Jose Ramirez time in the American League MVP race.
Indeed. And I can't tell you how many times across the American League we've literally said, Jack, okay, bye, Shohei. It's been real. Thanks a lot for your service. And now it seems like things have kind of opened up a little bit in that MVP race for 2024. Where do you kind of see this landing as well?
You know, it's so tough because I think a part of being an MVP candidate is your team's got to be pretty good as well. Like, I think in Kansas City, I'd love to have the homer pick and say Bobby Witt Jr., but they got to be good first. If they win, 80 to 85 games, win a division, and he's really good in the cause of that, which I think would, be very parallel, and that would correlate to more wins if he's an MVP type of candidate, then you can really take that seriously. But you look at some of the top contenders, I mean, man, Jose Ramirez has been so good for so long. He's killed the Royals for so long, and that would be my vote. I think right at the top of my head, I think a sleeper pick is like Royce Lewis in Minnesota. If he stays healthy for a full year, we saw what he was able to do in the postseason. I mean, bases juiced, the ball's leaving the yard there. I think there's such a tremendous bat over there. And then, Detroit's got a handful of guys. If you want to throw out a pitcher, I mean, Tarek Skubal might be one of the best arms in baseball. I mean, everybody's kind of got their niche guy, but it's going to come down to, at the end of the day, how many games do you win? Are you actually a great team with a great MVP candidate, an average or bad team player?
Yeah. And Brandon, you kind of look across, and I'll come to you especially because Jack makes a great point. Oftentimes when we're looking at that MVP candidate, we're not just looking at the individual, like it or not, but we're looking at the record and how much of an impact that individual's had on that team or on the standings overall. So with the Twins basically being everyone's consensus to be at the top of the AL Central when the 2024 season wraps, do we see an MVP candidate coming out of the Twins locker room? And do we see maybe that dark horse candidate, whether that's a dark horse candidate from the Central or whether it's a dark horse candidate within the American League? Who might that be?
Yeah, for me, Royce Lewis is that guy. And it's just, he does this like ice water in his veins celebration when he hits home runs, and it couldn't be closer to the truth. He has that it factor. It's not as though he's the new Derek Jeter, but I think he could be Minnesota's version of that. And it's just incredible what he has done, despite missing, all of 2020 due to the minor league season being canceled, and then much time with a couple of ACLs. And he just hits the ground running and keeps doing his thing. So I think the Twins have three candidates. Any one of the three between Correa, Buxton, and Lewis could. But if I'm looking outside the Twins, I'm going deep sleeper. I like Riley Green so much from Detroit. I know Spencer Torkelson's the guy there, and they got some other young players, but Riley Green to me can do it all. And I think that's the guy I'm watching to really break out this year is Green in Detroit.
I love that because Scott, he goes right to Detroit and he says, hey, there's a sleeper on your team. And you never kind of know how the year is going to play out. So many different variables that this early in the season, if you will, we can't quite account for. But would you agree that there's a sleeper on that Tigers team, or are there sleepers in other spaces around the Central, if not across the American League?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad that Jack and Brandon said Skubal and Green so that I don't have to just keep looking like a homer throughout this whole thing. But yeah, I mean, I really do think Riley Green showed it pre and post. He got injured twice last year, so in between both kind of major injuries that he suffered, he was crushing the ball, and I think that he's a guy that. Obviously Torkelson gets all the love because of the number 1 overall pick thing, but Riley Green is like the franchise here. And I think a lot of people in this fan base are starting to realize that. So I think that that's a great pick, even if it's not to win MVP, maybe just be like a down ballot, I got an 8th place MVP vote or something like that. Skubal, if it's a pitcher, is obviously going to be in that conversation. We expect a huge year out of him. Outside of
outside of the Tigers, which I think those two are very clearly the clubhouse leaders there. Bobby Witt Jr. Already talked about by Jack, but is obviously going to be in that conversation. But honestly, and J-Ram is my favorite in the American League Central as well, as he probably should be for all of us. But I really do think that, and I say this every year, and we all say this every year, so this isn't like a hot new take. If Byron Buxton plays over 140 games, like watch out kind of thing. But the big question every year is just, is he going to even come close to that number? But it does get me a little bit excited that he's actually gonna, maybe play in center field this year. And last year they got the Michael A. Taylor insurance, and this year it looks like he might play a little more defense, which will only raise value. So I'm going back to the well for like the 6th year in a row. If Byron Buxton stays healthy, kind of watch out.
And I'm going to piggyback off Scott's, pick there with another guy who dealt with injuries for a large portion of his career. And it's kind of counterproductive to what I just said earlier, but how about Luis Robert? I mean, Luis Robert was one of the best players in baseball, but again, I just went against my point of he's not going to be on a very good team. So maybe if he's traded at the deadline, he goes to another American League team, he can win the MVP award. But man, it's hard to find a better true center fielder out there. I mean, there's so many tools that he has. He's one of the more electrifying players out there. Unfortunately, in that window the White Sox had, we were kind of robbed of the true greatness of what he could be. There were so many years he was electric and had just a tremendous bat and glove out there, and then he'd get hurt and miss time. Same thing with Buxton. Like, I always thought they were so interchangeable because those are 5-tool guys. But again, it goes back to the point of where the White Sox going to be and where does Luis Robert end up, when we talk about it again in August.
Yeah, winning is going to be such a good point Jack's made throughout this, is that your record makes such a big difference. And I'm going to throw out Spencer Torkelson too. I mean, we talked about Riley Green, but Spencer Torkelson's second half was pretty good. A lot of people haven't really dug in a lot in his numbers in the second half. And I'm kind of rooting for him to do really well because the Guardians have the first pick in the draft coming this year. And there's so much bias against picking a first baseman number 1 overall. But if Spencer Torkelson has a great year, that can kind of shelve some of that and maybe make it easier for the Guardians to take my favorite guy number 1 overall. So I'm rooting, for Spencer Torkelson to have a really good year, but his second half last year was fantastic. I wouldn't be surprised to see him take another step forward this year.
And there's nothing more fun than kind of watching when it's a wide open race. I know last year it was maybe one of those races really across both the American League and the National League where the decision was kind of made early for us in terms of who was going to be the MVP candidate. But hopefully this year it'll be more competitive throughout. And if you want to hear these guys' thoughts on who is leading the MVP race or who's the dark horse as the season goes on, make sure you check out your favorite Locked On MLB show across the AL Central, each and every one of our shows, each and every one of our teams every single day.
Coming up, we'll finish out the AL MVP candidates with the AL West, where Corey Seager is the front runner, but he's not the only one deserving of the preseason hype. But first, get ready to say farewell to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's gonna win it all. And while you're locking in your college hoops picks, check out the MLB odds. It's not a surprise that the Dodgers have the best odds to win it all at plus 320. The Atlanta Braves aren't far behind at plus 450, followed by the Houston Astros at plus 700. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. We've looked at the AL East and AL Central candidates with some big names, hoping for big seasons. The AL West might have more candidates than anyone in the race for AL MVP.
Who's that AL candidate for MVP for this upcoming season for you?
I think it's going to be another season of, can Mike Trout put up MVP numbers again? I think that he's still in the running for that. He's just got to stay on the field and he's got to stay healthy. I think the last 3 years have just been awful for him in terms of injury. He had some back issues. He had a calf strain in 2021 that kept him out the full season. Last year, he broke this little tiny bone in your hand called the hamate bone. And that was kind of a freak accident. But look, I think a lot of people look at the injuries. They look at what Trout has done, between the injuries and said, oh, regression setting in. And the truth is I don't think that performance is the same as regression. Regression is, hey, the bat speed's slowing down. Hey, he's looking a little slower on the base paths. Hey, he's looking a little slower out there in the outfield. I think if Trout can stay healthy, I think that he's going to emerge as another MVP candidate. If I got to look across the division, I certainly could see Corey Seager in the running for that again. It was so interesting in not as many games as Shohei Ohtani, obviously, but to see Corey Seager be up there in terms of making it competitive, even though he had some injury time on the IL. I think Corey Seager's one to watch out for. But again, as a Angels fan, I got to go with Mike Trout. I'm never going to doubt Trout. It's just a matter of, dude, stay out there and play 150 games, please.
I absolutely love it. And of course, we are here with our AL West crew, Bryce Patrick of Locked On Rangers, Ty Dane Gonzalez of Locked On Mariners, John Frisch, of course, of Locked On Angels, and Eric Heisman of Locked On Astros. And I love what you mentioned, John, because absolutely you never know how these things are going to play out, because injuries, even those freakish ones like you just mentioned about Mike Trout, might dictate where the pendulum falls with the MVP candidates. But Eric, where do you think you might have an MVP candidate for the American League? Is one coming possibly out of the AL West?
Yeah, I think there could be. If you look at what Mike Trout, what he says definitely about he wants to stay in Anaheim. He wants to win with the Angels. And so that means something. So I think he's going to do whatever it takes to stay healthy. If he stays healthy, he can win MVP. Out of Houston, I think it's got to be Alvarez. He always tends to have this little slump where he just goes through a 2-week spell where he can't hit a home run to save his life. And he just strikes out a lot. But if he can cure that and stay healthy, just like Trout, I think this guy can hit 60 home runs and compete against Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge had a off season last year. He was injured a lot too. But Juan Soto, he's looking to make a lot of money. And so I think that, or he already made a lot of money or whatever, but he's looking to go out there. But don't sleep on, of course, Corey Seager, but don't sleep on these young Orioles kids. Some of these young guys, they could pop off because they have no fear. You saw what they did last year, and I think these Orioles guys are going to go off. Maybe not this year, but Gunnar Henderson or one of the Audrey Rushman, one of those guys.
Yeah, and that might be boiling down to what team or what players may end up being a little bit ahead of schedule that may make it a competitive race. What about you, Bryce? Anyone from that Rangers team from the AL West who might vie for, even across the AL, but who might vie for MVP now that the reigning MVP is no longer, at least in this league?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some obvious options with the Rangers, but I mean, if you're looking for singular talents in the American League West, I mean, position player wise, honestly, I feel like the list kind of has to start with Julio Rodriguez. The guy is just insanely talented. I mean, does everything you want on a baseball field. Like, he had a down year last year and finished 5th in MVP voting. Like, the guy is absolutely astoundingly good. But I think another guy who's a dark horse, and it's hard to say dark horse when he finished 3rd in MVP voting, but it's Marcus Semien. Yeah. The guy is just the model of consistency, 162 games every single year. Last year broke the record for most plate appearances in a regular season and postseason combined, because the guy played every single game of every single day at second base, no DH days, no time off, no nothing. The guy is just the model of consistency. He does everything you want in the diamond: defense, offense, base running. He is just the model of every day going to go out there, and had a 7.5 Baseball Reference 4 season last year. Was just astoundingly good. Even though he's not the flashiest player, he is the model of consistency. And in a game where you have 162 games in a season, consistency is so important.
It's so important. And Ty, I'm going to kind of piggyback where Bryce left off, because maybe we talk about that like a dark horse candidate, or I like to say, we don't talk enough about that particular player. Is there any guy like that for you who could be in that conversation, whether that player is from the AL West or just overall, who might be viable for MVP this year?
Well, clearly it's Julio, because 2 of you didn't mention him, and that's literally one of the most exciting players in all of baseball. So thank you, Bryce, for at least mentioning him. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Julio is coming off of, I would say, a disappointing season. I think he would say a disappointing season, and he was still a 6-win player. He was only, slightly above average for most of the season, which is not what you want out of the face of your franchise. But he still finished with 32 home runs, 37 stolen bases. He was ridiculous, all while playing elite defense. And that's, of course, in big part because he was unreal in the month of August, like literally broke major league records, a month we will probably never see again out of a player for a very, very, very long time. I think some of the issues that he went through, some of the growing pains that he went through over the past year really bothered him. And he's put a lot of work in over the last few months here, this offseason down in Tampa. And I think we're going to see a very motivated Julio Rodriguez because, again, he was only slightly above average for most of the year outside of that month of August. And late in games, when, a lot rested on his shoulders, he did not come through more often than not. He was trying to do a little too much. And, that kind of goes back to our conversation just about this offense in general, where, a lot relies upon Julio. A lot of the success of this Mariners ball club, especially in 2023, relied upon Julio being that guy consistently. And I feel like, for a 23-year-old, it's pretty unfair stuff to put on him, right? But now that he has more support in this lineup and now has the guidance of Brant Brown, who's considered to be one of the better hitting instructors in the game today, as the Mariners offensive coordinator, which is a new title for them on their coaching staff. And he's really going to be helping them with situational hitting. The guy that I really look at that Brant Brown can help the most is Julio. And with the work that Julio's put in this offseason, I wouldn't be surprised if Julio comes out with a 8-win, 9-win season this year. I think Julio could be insane this year.
Indeed. And I love the fact that you guys had so many candidates, because that tells you so much about how competitive the AL West is indeed, in addition to the American League overall. So again, if you guys want to hear more about it, especially as the debate rages on once the season really gets underway, don't forget to check out your favorite Locked On MLB show, Your Team Every Day, with the guys we have right here tonight.
Now that we've talked about all the AL MVP candidates, let's focus on the NL. And once again, the conversation around all of baseball, no matter what the topic is none other than Shohei Ohtani, but it's a teammate of his that has maybe better odds to win the award this season.
You guys have been talking about and jarring about how competitive this NL West division is, and it is so competitive that literally FanDuel has loaded up MVP candidates from the ML West. Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, Fernando Tatis, Freddie, Freeman, Corbin Carroll, and Manny Machado. And of course, there are 12, but think about that. Literally, as they put together a list of 12 possible MVP candidates coming out of the National League, 6 of them come out of one decision, which is absolutely amazing to me. So I wanted to ask the question, Millard, and I also want to get your take on it then, Paul, as well. Millard, what other players are maybe MVP candidates in this particular division, but also of the 6 that I mentioned, who do you think is kind of the front runner?
The front runner is a big question. For me, there's 2 guys that really stick out because I kind of look at last year's MVP as like the case study for who should win it this year or who can win it this year, because Ronald Acuna had himself a historic season, right? 40 home runs, 70 stolen bases. So if he's healthy, he's probably going to put up similar numbers once again. So for me, the question is, who can do what Ronald Acuna did last year? And for me, there's 2 candidates that could really do something like what he did last year. That's Fernando Tatis from the San Diego Padres, and it's Corbin Carroll from the Arizona Diamondbacks. 2 players that could hit 30 plus 40 home runs and still 40 to 70 stolen bases. Like, I don't think it would be insane if either of those guys had like a 30 home run, 50 stolen base type of season. I think that's what you're going to have to kind of put up statistically to be in the MVP conversation. So for me, I think Tatis and Carroll are the 2 leaders in the MVP conversation right now from the NL West. And if you're looking at a dark horse candidate, I mean, it's tough. I mean, like you said, we're loaded at the top in terms of MVP candidates, but I'll go with the guy who really struggled last year after getting a massive contract extension on Javier's team. I'm going with Manny Machado, who has been an MVP type player throughout his career. The Padres are coming off a really down season. So if Manny Machado has himself a big bounce back year, maybe the Padres team has a bounce back year. And with those 2 being connected, I can see Machado playing his way into the MVP conversation.
Millard, you mentioned Corbin Carroll as one of your leading candidates, and I want to jump in on that and just compare. I'm not going to tell you who this second player is here, but Corbin Carroll last year finishes, according to Baseball Reference, with a WAR of 5.4, hits 25 home runs, a batting average of 285, finishing the line of OBP 362, slugging of 506, and OPS 860s, OPS plus of 134. He did that in 565 at-bats. In 367 at-bats, this player hit 20 home runs with 297 batting average, an OBP of 389, a slugging of 542, an OPS of 931, and an OPS plus of 138, while also hitting 20 home runs and stealing 20 bases. That's the Colorado Rockies' Nolan Jones. If you're looking for a dark horse candidate, if you love Corbin Carroll that much, there is zero doubt in my mind. If both of those players had the same amount of at-bats, I think Nolan Jones has a great chance to not fully steal Rookie of the Year away from Corbin Carroll last year, but certainly someone that changes the narrative and changes the conversation. Because if the Rockies played Nolan Jones all of last year, I don't think it's that crazy to think he's a 25-25 guy, and I think the ceiling could be a 30-30 guy. Nolan Jones is a game changer, and if you're looking for a dark horse MVP candidate, you want to go real crazy, Nolan Jones has a comparable stat line to Corbin Carroll.
And Paul, I have a follow-up to that. Yes, to throw cold water on what you're saying. He plays in Coors Field, and fair or not, you when you put up numbers like batting average, on base, slugging, you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing apples to oranges when you get to play half your games on the moon, which is what the Coors Field is like. And granted, I really like Nolan Jones as a player, but I just, like you said, it's probably not going to happen. It is a dark horse pick. And if he puts up monster numbers, the Rockies get penalized. I'm not saying it's fair, but you see the Hall of Fame voting and stuff like that, they get penalized. And then you see, counterpoint, you see guys like, Nolan Arenado and others leave, and they continue to put up great numbers. And so it's kind of unfair, but they do get penalized for that reason. And I just wanted to add, on this topic, I think that there's almost no chance that Shohei Ohtani wins the MVP. Yeah, even though I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, Shohei Ohtani, he's a DH this year. DHs just don't win. I mean, he's an exceptional DH, maybe the best hitter in the game, but he's adding zero defensive value. So this is not the year to place a bet on Shohei Ohtani. I think there are two players, maybe even three, but probably two, on the Dodgers who are more likely than Shohei Ohtani to win MVP. I would personally think the favorite would be Mookie Betts in this division. And Freddie Freeman, I would, even though, he's just a first baseman, he's so exceptionally good at hitting. But for me, it'd probably be Mookie Betts. I like the call of Fernando Tatis comeback. Because people sleeping on him. I mean, that guy, he's still super young and just the tools are off the charts. But anyway, just my kind of hot take is Ohtani's just out for me.
I agree with Ben that the Dodgers will have the top three finishers in the MVP voting. I'm pretty sure that's what I took away from his comment anyway. But Ohtani would have won the AL MVP last year, even if he hadn't thrown a pitch. He was the best hitter in the league and was and some of that was because Corey Seager was hurt even more than Ohtani was. And so there wasn't a Ronald Acuna type candidate last year. I don't disagree with Ben's point about a DH having a harder time winning the MVP. Nolan Jones, going back to, I don't know if any of us predicted we'd talk about Nolan Jones this much in an MVP segment, but Nolan Jones is not Jordan Luplow. I'll give you that. Nolan Jones is really good. And the one thing that I think could counteract some of that Coors Field, call it bias or whatever, the penalty is that he is very, very good defensively too. Has a really good arm, and he's a lot of fun to watch. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Nolan Jones finish in the top 10 in MVP. I think it's kind of crazy to think he has a chance to actually win it. But especially he strikes out too much. And I think that's something that teams are going to exploit now that, now that we've talked about him for 5 minutes, teams are going to be aware because all the front offices are watching this saying, Nolan Jones, we got, oh, good. He strikes out 30% of the time. Let's do that. Let's take the strike him out approach. And so he's going to have to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. The fact that, people talk about all the other division stuff, but there's a whole lot of really, really good players in this division. And I mean, you could have 6, 7 of the top 10 in the NL MVP voting from the National League West. And that's kind of cool, especially the 3 Dodgers finished 1, 2, 3.
Just to add some context here to Nolan Jones and the home away splits. Just to give my final thing, he had a higher slugging and OPS on the road last year, same amount of home runs and only 4 less RBI, but 26 more strikeouts on the road. So obviously that still is a thing. But Nolan Jones is someone that shows that if he is the one that can set the standard, that if the rest of the Rockies can follow and they can play on the road, but I'm telling you, like, Nolan Jones is legit.
We have to stop fighting the infighting. This man over here is the villain. We can't argue amongst each other. And speaking of villain,
imagine looking like Javi and calling somebody else a villain.
Right. So Paul is shots fired for Paul, but it's really everybody shooting shots at Jeff Snyder, right?
Bring it on, baby. It should be. And look, just to chime in real quick, Manny Machado is a great point. Like, bounce back vibes. He had an off season, especially after the extension. That's a great point. Should have won the MVP in 2022, as everybody knows. I think Tatis is the clear front runner. And while that might sound a little biased, it is. I also have the bobblehead. I think that there's 2 reasons for this. And I understand that this doesn't play as much in baseball as other sports, but I do wonder if there's going to be a feeling of, after everything the Dodgers did with Yamamoto, with Teoscar Hernandez, with Jason Hayward being brought back is a big deal too, I think, for that team. With all of that, are people still going to look and say, hey, you have 6 players that are 6-win players, like 6 F4 baseball reference, but one of them for some reason is the MVP. I think that the Padres have that in their favor, which is that they're looked at as the disaster story, and they should be. They spent all that money. They made a bunch of moves. They didn't even make the playoffs. So you make this bounce back season. And Tatis, for years I was told by baseball knowers about how Byron Buxton of the American League was the only player that could ever reach 10 wins above replacement because he's got the offense and defense. And then everyone ignored that he never really done it ever before. Fernando Tatis Jr. has been an MVP candidate before, and he's been exceptional before. 113 WRC plus last year, but a career, like, he had a 158 and a 151 and a 151 the years before that. If he gets back his offensive prowess, which if you look at weighted on base versus his expected weighted on base, some of his batted ball data might have been a little bit unlucky, and also coming off an injury and a suspension. If you add that to what he did last year, just being that 113 WRC plus guy, that's still good, don't get me wrong, but by his standards, it's low. And you add the defense. This is a platinum glove winner. Yeah. Almost all of his wins above replacement, or at least a lot of it last year, was being exceptional defensively. And I honestly think it was under-discussed a little bit that he transitioned.
Javi.
Exactly. From shortstop to everyone made the Tatis, the error jokes or whatever, even though he was better than other shortstops in the division, but got slandered for it more than that person that I won't name. But I think that it's because of that. And I think there's a little bit of a redemption story around the Padres right now. And I think because of that, and don't get me wrong, I could see a player being I could see Mookie Betts being an 8-win player, but then Tatis is 7.7. And then people are like, well, why are we giving it to a Dodger when they have the Justice League on their team? Like, that just feels a little bit weird. So that's why I think he's the front runner for especially this division. I can't speak for all the others. The Braves are pretty loaded too. So I can't speak for them, but that's why I think he should be the favorite to win the MVP. But I really like Nolan Jones, although crazy high BABIP of 401, which is kind of wild.
Oh, there you go.
Like, did he get a little bit lucky? Maybe, but I still really like the guy, young, and the home road splits was a great point by Paul. That's why I was cheering in the background like this was a wrestling match. I'm rooting for you, Paul.
His BABIP
I love you, buddy.
Like 450 on the road,
right.
by the way.
I think the MVP race from the NL West perspective is probably going to be more exciting and intriguing than even who wins the division. So I definitely can't wait to see kind of how this battle plays out, especially as the season winds down. And of course, for more around the NL West, check out your favorite Locked On MLB show, your team every day. And
Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. This includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channel lets you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, traveling, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. And if you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV.
Now, it's interesting every single year to kind of see how things play out as far as MVP candidates go across the whole of the National League. But let's talk about this NL Central division and how we kind of see things playing out there. Stephen, who do you see, player or players, that might possibly come out of this division as strong MVP candidates?
You know, it's funny because we talked about this just a little before we recorded, and I think we're kind of all in agreement of how this may go. You have to squint really, really hard to find a legitimate MVP candidate in the National League Central. And don't get me wrong, there's tons of great, talented young players coming up. The Pirates have O'Neal Cruz. The Reds have Ellie De La Cruz, Matt McClain, and Spencer Steer. All guys that could be someday in that conversation. The Cubs are still looking to find their big guy. The Cardinals, I don't know that anybody over there still has enough in the tank to be considered an MVP candidate. You know, Nolan Arenado is not the same Nolan that he once was. Is Goldschmidt still Goldschmidt? We don't know. I just don't know that there's a legitimate contender for that title in this division this year. But down the road, we're going to have lots of conversations about this.
Indeed, indeed. Chuck, do you see anyone possibly being an NL candidate from this Central division?
No, not really. But to me, Nolan Arenado is always the biggest threat offensively at the plate. When that guy comes to the plate, I don't care what the situation is, makes me nervous. I do not, and the same with Goldschmidt, but especially Arenado. When he played with Colorado and, of course, the last few years with the Cardinals. I think that guy, I know he's an aging player, not maybe what he used to be at third base, but still a big-time threat. To me, he's the biggest threat. There's some future stars in this, right, like De La Cruz, but I think the biggest threat at the plate right now is Nolan Arenado.
And that is fair because like we said, there are really good players coming out of the NL Central, maybe not that greatness, but if you're going to go with greatness, JD, you might go with the perennial greatness of a Nolan Arenado. But who do you call as maybe a possible, and because we said we don't know that there's one there, I'll say dark horse candidate coming out of the Central Division for NL MVP?
If I had to select one off of a different team other than the Cardinals, I'm either sliding with maybe a Matt McClain or a Cody Bellinger. Those are the guys on the other teams that, McClain was so good with the Reds last year. And when his injury happened, it didn't kill the Reds, but it certainly brought him down a notch, and they weren't able to complete the task of making it to the playoffs. Bellinger's been an MVP before, had the comeback season last year. If he continues to get back healthy with that shoulder the way he looked last year, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to put up big numbers once again and lead the Cubs to a division title. But as far as the Cardinals go, I would definitely say Nolan Arenado. I mean, I know everybody's like he's getting older and stuff. He's 33. I mean, it's not like we're talking about a 38, 39-year-old player anymore. He had one bad year where you're considering an OPS plus of 109 bad these days. That's fine. I mean, it's a down year for him. But dealing with back injuries last year, he's kind of rededicated himself this year. He's also a little upset. He's a little pissed off that he's getting knocked like he's some old guy. And I'm anxious to see the Nolan Arenado revenge tour here in 2024.
Indeed. And Sam, you talk about the possibilities for Cody Bellinger. Is he maybe, and I'll put in air quotes, an outside candidate for MVP coming out of the Central Division? Do we have any others as well who might be those outside candidates that have that kind of banner year?
Yeah, I think I side with the crew here. I don't think it'll be Bellinger. I like Arenado just because of the upside and what he could do defensively. And like JD was saying, I mean, he had a miserable Arenado year last year, and it was still pretty solid when you actually look at it. So, and then I would probably just say because of the overall pure talent, if De La Cruz is able to put it together, you could see him, stealing 50 bases and hitting like 40 homers or something crazy. If it just all came together, it probably won't this early on, but I think he would be that. So those two guys, I think I side kind of with the group there. I don't think it'll be a Cub, unfortunately.
Ethan, anyone coming out of this NL Central division who could possibly vie for or maybe sneak in and get that hardware this season?
I mean, I agree with the crew here. I think Arenado is probably that guy because he's shown it before. Technically, if we're being real, Bellinger's shown it before because he's quite literally done it before. So I think Bellinger is a guy that you can mention in there too. MVP to me, I think, is a very interesting case because you don't usually look at pitchers for that. And I do think that there are some pitchers in this division that could vie for it. Maybe even a Mitch Keller if he has the full season of the first half that he had last year. Not saying that he would win it, but he could garner some votes. But if I had to name three guys, I mean, I definitely think it's Bellinger, Arenado, maybe a Goldschmidt, maybe an Ellie De La Cruz if he really does take that next step. And I'll even throw Matt McClain in there too. I think Matt McClain, again, like JD mentioned earlier, was a very integral part of that Reds team. And maybe he does take that next step that everybody thinks that Reds team could continue to take as well.
And if you guys want to know more, especially as the season goes on and some of these players show what they are worth or maybe show that they are a step slower, definitely want to check out our podcast across the NL Central with your favorite Locked On MLB show with your team every single day.
That saves the NL East for last, but they certainly aren't least. Ronald Acuna Jr. leads the FanDuel odds for NL MVP, and there are plenty of players around the division that aren't far behind him.
Every team's still going to have that guy, an MVP guy, or even an X Factor guy who might actually help the team to exceed the expectations. So who's that MVP for you for the Nationals, and who's sort of your X Factor to say, wow, they may actually outperform what I expected?
Well, to open up, it's got to be shortstop C.J. Abrams. C.J. Abrams is one of the main pieces coming back in that Juan Soto deal. Obviously, when you trade Juan Soto, you need someone who's going to come back and make an instant impact. It took a little bit of a while for C.J. Abrams kind of get going back in 2022. Last year started off a little bit slow, and then Davey Martinez, he put him up in the leadoff spot. Since then, C.J. Abrams kind of took off, stole 40-plus bags, only got caught stealing just a handful of times. I think C.J. Abrams is going to be the guy for the Nationals and all their fans this year that you're going to be kind of hanging your hat on him. How can he develop? Can he be the next sort of kind of Trey Turner come through Washington, D.C.? That's kind of the pipe dream that a lot of us have, but still, it's something that you just got to have to think about. And also another name to watch, again, Mackenzie Gore. So when you get in that Juan Soto deal, a big left-handed pitcher, someone who could be the ace of your staff moving forward. He showed a lot of good things from 2023, stayed really healthy this year. A lot of people are expecting a big 2024 season for him and a lot of other younger prospects. But I look at C.J. Abrams, Mackenzie Gore to kind of be the cherry on top of that Juan Soto deal. So that's what it's going to be about this year for the Washington Nationals.
Indeed. And when you look at the same, Lindsay, for the Braves, who's sort of this team's, and what we're going to do is a little bit different with the Braves. We're going to say, because they had an NL MVP last season, so let's say who's going to be their team MVP, not named Ronald Acuna Jr., and who's sort of that X factor, or I like actually how Clary put it, kind of that guy to watch.
For me, the guys to watch on this team are some of the new additions, right? Jared Kelenic, Chris Sale. And the reason for that is what we talked about. You did so well in the regular season and you kind of fizzled out in the postseason. So Jared Kelenic comes in to replace the combination of Eddie Rosario and Kevin Pillar. And they've said he's going to play every single day. If he struggles, they're going to walk through it, let him play through it. And so the question here is going to be, what does he look like? Does he look like the early career Jared Kelenic? Does he look like last season Jared Kelenic? But what he does can impact the depth of this lineup. And then Chris Sale is one of the most talented pitchers in baseball, like in recent history, right? Yeah. Career leader in strikeouts per 9 innings among qualified pitchers, but he's also thrown very few innings. And so the question here is, what does he look like in October? Can the Braves get him to October, and can he be another piece to help them get over the hump of the Philadelphia Phillies. But I do think, and something that Peter mentioned, is Atlanta's depth is a little bit of a concern after the starters. Yes and no. The backups don't necessarily inspire a ton of confidence, but at the same time, you saw this last year. The offense is strong enough, the rotation's deep enough where if you lose one or two guys, you feel like you can still go out and win, 100 games or so. The question for Atlanta is going to be if you see some guys slump and struggle combined with some key injuries, what happens to Atlanta there? But in the organization, they're pretty confident in the makeup of the roster for the regular season and for October, provided they can get some key contributions from Sale and some of the other studs in your lineup, your Matt Olson, your Spencer Strider, your Ronald Acuna.
Yeah, absolutely. Lindsay, I mean, that's a great point. And I got to tell you, the cool thing about the Braves is just how dominant they've been for the past, decade, and the way they built this roster with sustainability. I guess my question, though, from the Phillies' perspective is it almost feels like playing those guys so often, getting all those stats in the regular season, wearing them out like Peter was talking about. Does that, do you think, hurt the Braves in the postseason? Because honestly, this division for at least Atlanta and Philadelphia goes beyond just 162. So what do you think?
It's an interesting debate, and one a lot of Braves fans have. They discuss, should we be giving these guys more days off? But then you also lean towards the perspective of they want to play every day. It's like, is Ronald Acuna Jr. probably the ideal leadoff player? A few years ago, you would have said no, but he wants to do it, so you let him do it. I think it's a delicate balance, and you saw late in the year Brian Snitker try to start giving guys partial days off, taking Matt Olson out after the 6th or 7th inning, giving Ronald Acuna Jr. a DH day. But there's definitely the need to be mindful of the workload for these guys. The flip side of that is some of the conversation around Atlanta and around the offense was they had a 5-day layoff between the regular season and the postseason, and the timing wasn't quite there. They weren't quite ready to handle the Phillies' high-octane relievers, and the offensive game plan wasn't quite sound because they hadn't faced real competition in 5 or 6 days. So there's a valid conversation amongst Braves fans and the organization. What do we do differently in 2024? Is it giving guys more days off? Is it maintaining the intensity all the way through that layoff? What has to change?
Yeah. And Connor, I kind of want to follow up on that question for the Phillies that Lindsay just kind of posed at the end. What are some of the, maybe those things that the Phillies look to say, hey, we were on our way, like we were the hot hand. We didn't quite, make it to getting that World Series championship, but we were right there. What are some of the tweaks that maybe you see that they can make should they be in position again to kind of make that run for the World Series?
Well, they didn't make many tweaks this offseason to the roster. I think, honestly, they got unlucky. All due respect to the Diamondbacks, and no one from Locked On Diamondbacks is in here, so I can say it. They were not the better team. But they played the better, final 4 games of that series, and the Phillies' offense went quiet. The Braves know how that goes. You can get unlucky in the postseason. You're gone even if you're a good team. So I think what's really important for the Phillies is you're going to have Trey Turner not be awful to start the year, hopefully. And you also have Bryce Harper not missing a month and a half and coming back from Tommy John surgery. So your 2 big guys who could be MVP candidates, you expect them to be healthy the whole year. That might be the difference between the 90 wins from last year to, hey, maybe triple digits this year. Who knows?
Yeah, and you're right. This is one of those divisions, and I want to pose this question a little bit later, so I'm just going to kind of tee it up a little bit now, but it's one of those divisions that's so deep. I mean, and it's one where, okay, deep in maybe the top 2 or 3, and then it kind of falls off. But I still think it makes for a very super competitive, very compelling, and very dramatic situation, almost down to the wire. Like you said, maybe if we make that Braves decision, or we make that, I think we all kind of want equivocally here, or maybe unequivocally, that it'll be the Braves. They'll win the division. We all agree. But then it becomes, where do the rest of the teams kind of go from there? How do they get into the postseason? And I think you could argue that this is one of the most compelling storylines across this entire division. And again, I want to circle back to it later. But first, I want to talk to Ryan Finkelstein and ask that same question about the Mets. When you look at this team, who do you see as their MVP? Who do you see as that X factor guy, or maybe that guy that you're going to have your eye on this season saying, hey, time to shine?
Well, I think the best player on the Mets is Francisco Lindor, but this year it's Pete Alonso's contract year. So all eyes are going to be on Pete. I mean, we saw Aaron Judge a couple years ago really dominate in a contract year in New York. Pete's got a chance to hit a lot of home runs and make himself a lot of money. So Pete Alonso is the guy to watch this year. I'd also say Francisco Alvarez amongst the young players. He's the one that's got the superstar potential. So if you're looking at a couple of guys in the Mets that are going to be hitting a lot of home runs and creating some buzz in New York, it's Pete Alonso and Francisco Alvarez. One other X factor I would say, just a guy that could be great or awful, is Luis Severino. That was a sign the Mets made this offseason. He has a chance to be a frontline starter again, but after what he did with the Yankees last year, I'm not really buying it. We'll see what happens, but there's a lot of volatility there with Severino.
So, Connor, this is still a loaded Phillies team, still a team that has everything in front of them, whether they win the division or not. Like you said, I don't think that really matters to them. I think they're just focused on let us get back to the postseason, and then we'll take it from there, just like we saw them do last season. But when you look across this roster, who's your MVP for the Phillies? Who's your X factor or your guy that you've got your eye on this season?
Well, he's one of the faces of the franchise and one of the faces of baseball. It's Bryce Harper. It's got to be. This team goes as he goes. And he's the only Philly to win an MVP since you had Jimmy Rollins and Ryan Howard go back-to-back. So, like, that's what you're looking at for the guy who can carry this team. As far as the X factor is concerned, a really interesting guy overall in baseball is Johan Rojas. Lindsay knows a bunch about him being a prospects guy on the side. And this kid hit 302 in over 100 at-bats last year, but completely faded in the postseason offensively. Defensively, he could be the best center fielder in baseball. But is he going to be able to hit enough to allow the Phillies to use that defense? So if you get him to hit and you have that tool in the outfield, like, you're unbelievable. And if he doesn't work out, then you're piecemealing an outfield with Whit Merrifield and other guys. So he's the X factor for the Phillies' success this year for me.
Indeed, indeed. And Peter, what about you when you're looking across this Nationals team? Like we talked about, there's always an opportunity, right, for a team to still do better than we're anticipating. Even if you're at the bottom of the NL East, you can still exceed expectations. So with that in mind, kind of when you look at this team, where do you see the MVP and kind of where do you see the X factor guy or the one you got your eye on?
Yeah, for sure. Let me give you a couple of numbers here. 40. I'll give you another number. 40 as well. 40-40 Jazz Chisholm Jr. season, baby.
Okay, you heard it here first.
That is, we've talked about it for many years with Jazz Chisholm Jr. When are we going to see him play 162? And now is the time for Jazz Chisholm Jr. 162, 150 over. And it's going to be 40-40 Jazz. He is going to be the Marlins MVP. And listen, if it's 40-40, then he could be the NL MVP as well. So huge. However, the Marlins more generally, there's a load of guys to keep your eye on. They have this offseason gone down to buy low risk candidates. You've got Vidal Brujan in there. Tim Anderson's just signed as well. Nick Gordon's been traded for. And they've also got Edward Cabrera in the rotation. All four of those guys, I think, are like extreme sleepers that could absolutely pop off as well for the Marlins. If they do, they can piece it together, and this team is really competitive again.
Now that we've heard the MVP candidates for every MLB division for 2024, check out the rest of Locked On's MLB season previews, including over-under win totals for every team, the division winners, and what were the biggest off-season storylines you may have missed. Don't miss an episode by subscribing to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.